book of Revelation, and we've gotten to the 16th chapter, and I've been showing you these charts, which show the how that the seven bowls of wrath that we're studying now parallel the seven trumpets that the angels blew back in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th chapters. And I'm not reading all those passages, but what I want to just keep before you is everything after chapter 11 is restating the same things that were in 1 through 11, or really after the seven churches of Asia, 4 through 11, all those things that we study there, they're restated just kind of in a different way. And the emphasis, the reason for it, we're not specifically told, but anybody think of a reason why you would repeat something? Okay, for emphasis sake, like Peter said in his epistle, I'm reminding you of what I've already said before. And so this is for emphasis sake. The Christians at this point in time were being persecuted mostly by the Jews up until just the very end of what we're looking at in chapters 1 through 11. In chapters 1 through 11, persecution had begun, and it ended up getting so bad that many people were killed, not just by Jews. Remember Paul, when he was Saul, he imprisoned and killed many Christians. Then he became a Christian himself, and then he ended up going to Rome, being imprisoned in Rome, and then took another journey and then went back and got thrown in prison. Only this time, the reason for imprisonment was because the Romans didn't like the Christians now, and he ended up being beheaded in Rome under Nero. He was actually imprisoned by both times under Nero. First time Nero was basically a good guy, heard his plea and set him free. Then something happened by the time he got back to the next time. And what was that thing that had happened? Anybody remember? No, this is in Rome. Something happened that changed Nero's mind about the fire. Somebody set fire to Rome. A lot of people think it was Nero himself, but if it was him, he got a ton of flack because a lot of people thought he did, whether he did or not, and so he needed somebody to blame. And guess who he blamed? No, the Christians, because the Christians were this new thing that even the Jews didn't like, and even though a lot of the Jews became Christians, the ones that didn't like any of the Christians, whether they're Jewish or a Gentile. And so then the persecution started in earnest under Nero. That's why he's called the beast in the book of Revelation. And so we are reviewing this because it is such a powerful message that vengeance for all the persecutions is going to come on those who did the persecuting, especially right here in the Revelation. It's vengeance against Israel, the ones that had rejected all the prophets and rejected finally the Son that God sent, and rejected him, and then rejected the ones that Jesus had sent out, all the apostles and the other prophets that we read about in the book of Acts. These guys were all rejected by the majority of the Jews, and particularly the Jewish leadership. And as we've been studying numerous times, how corrupt everything had gotten, and it bears repeating. And that's why these visions, they're slightly different, but you can definitely see the parallels. That's what we're doing here, is showing the parallels between these. And some of them aren't exact, some of them aren't really the same at all, but in general, it's a repeat of the whole 3.5 years that uh, took place under the occupation of the Roman. Well, not the occupation, because the Romans had occupied it for a long time, but during the 3.5 years that Vespasian and Titus came to put this revolution down and put it down permanently. So that's where we are right now. We've gotten to the fifth bowl of wrath, and I read this last week, but we didn't. I'm going to read some from Josephus, which illustrates it, and so I'm just going to read it again. The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and the beast is Nero. Yeah, leading the Roman Empire. And so this wrath is being poured out on the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues because of the pain. They blasphemed the God of heaven because their pains and their sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. And so they were in big turmoil because something happened. God's wrath was poured out on the beast. Something happened with the beast. Now, well, all this whole section that I just read is referring to the time between Nero's death and Vespasian taking the emperorship. Nero's death was what happened to the beast. He got in big trouble with people, and just like most of the emperors, somebody came along, and the very first one, Julius Caesar, what happened to him? Many knives by even people he thought were his friends. Et tu, Brute, and you, Brutus, are you along with this? So the intrigue in the Roman Empire was incredible, with all the leaders vying for authority or vying to get their kids to be in authority and all that kind of stuff. And so this happened to Nero as well. I think he ruled for like 13 years, but towards the end he was getting nutty, as we looked at already, and violent, and people decided, no, this guy's got to go. And when he dodged it for quite a while, but when he finally realized that he wasn't going to dodge it anymore, rather than be humiliated and killed or forced to do some humiliating thing before they killed him, he decided to kill himself. Yes. Yeah. Um, so anyway, he decided to end his own life. So he got one of his servants to help him plunge the knife into his neck, and he died. So this is what happened. And then his kingdom became full of darkness. And these people, a lot of imagery here. Remember, all of this is just imagery. They didn't literally gnaw their own tongues because of the pain, but they were really miserable. And that's what I'm going to illustrate now by reading some things from Josephus. This is when Nero died, a civil war broke out. And the reason for that is different ones were trying to different factions were trying to gain the leadership and put their guy up for the emperorship. And there was 3 of them that were claimed the emperor title, 3 of them, and then a 4th in 1 year after Nero died in 68. And things were so bad that people were sending messages to Vespasian, who was in Israel, trying to conquer Israel. And they were saying, Vespasian, you got to come back and fix this. You got to come back, be the emperor, because things are terrible here now. So there's civil wars going on. That's what we're going to read about here. And it's going to be quite a bit of reading from Josephus. So here we go. This is from the Wars of the Jews by Josephus. And as as you all know already, Josephus had been an, a general, one of the high ups in the Israeli army, and had been fighting in the north when Vespasian and Titus came and attacked from the north. And when he was conquered, I guess for lack of a better term, rather than be killed, he said, "Hey guys, you know what? I'd like to jump over to your side, and I'm not going to be a general for you guys, but I will write a history of all the children of Israel, the whole nation of Israel, from way back from when it began, right up through, and I'll make a chronicle of this conquest that you're doing right now." And so they thought that was a good idea, just like you read the Babylonian Chronicle or the Hezekiah's Prism or any of those. They're all just telling all the people that they conquered and all that. And so that happened under every empire. And so they let Josephus live, but it was his job to write this history. And he ended up going over to Rome and living in Titus's own household when Titus became the emperor. And that's when he wrote this stuff. So he's an eyewitness, and he's an eyewitness from the viewpoint of the Jews. He wasn't a believer in Jesus, but and so he didn't have any reason to write things that would verify what the book of Revelation says at all. He's just writing what happened. And he may have exaggerated a few points, but you get the idea. So here we go. Now, as Vespasian was returned to Caesarea and was getting ready with all his army to march directly to Jerusalem. So by this time, Vespasian had conquered the north, Galilee, and had been coming down, and he returned to Caesarea, which Caesarea is actually in Samaria, in the area of Samaria, or maybe southern Galilee. I think it is southern Galilee. So he's still kind of north, but moving down. And now it's time. I'm heading to Jerusalem, put an end to this thing once and for all. So that's what he's doing, getting ready to march directly to Jerusalem. He was informed that Nero was dead after he had reigned 13 years and 8 days. But as to any narration after what manner he abused his power in the government and committed the management of affairs to those vile wretches, Nymphidius and to Gelnus, his unworthy freedmen, and how he had a plot laid against him by them and was deserted by all his guards and ran away with 4 of his most trusty freedmen and slew himself in the suburbs of Rome, and how those that occasioned his death were in no long time brought themselves to punishment, how also the war in Gaul ended. Gaul is Spain. So there was fighting going on in Spain as well, how that ended, and how Galba was made emperor and returned out of Spain to Rome, and how he was accused by the soldiers as a pusillanimous person. Anybody know what a pusillanimous person is? Well, they used to call people that did this a pugilist. Boxer, instead of calling him a boxer, that was a pugilist. So the pusillanimous was a contentious person. And so, and slain by treachery in the middle of the marketplace in Rome. That's Galba. He was the first of these emperors that he claimed the emperorship coming back from Spain. And he was put to death in the middle of the marketplace in Rome, what we know of as the Forum, the Roman Forum, same place Julius Caesar was killed. And Otho, he was the second one. He was made emperor with his expedition against the commanders of Vitellius. Now we're going to see Vitellius was the next one after Otho. Anyway, and his destruction thereupon, and besides what troubles there were under Vitellius, and the fight was all about the capital, as also how Antonius Primus and Musania or Musina, well, Mucianus, okay, slew Vitellius. This all happened with 1 year. These three emperors, none of them reigned even a year. It was all just a couple months, just getting killed by their own people or people from that were supporting these other emperors. Anyway, and his German legions, and thereby put an end to that civil war. I have omitted to give an exact account of them. In other words, all this stuff that I just told you, I really haven't. I'm not going to tell you a bunch of stuff about it. This stuff just this happened. There were three of these emperors, would-be emperors, in 1 year, and then when Vespasian got over there, he became the fourth, and then he was emperor like for I forget how many years, but Vespasian was the one that had the power that everybody liked. The Roman armies liked him and supported him, so he finally settled down this civil war that took place after Nero died, and then confusion all broke out. So he says, Josephus says, I'm not telling you about the political intrigue, but watch what he does. He says, I have omitted to give an exact account of them because they're well known by all. I don't have to tell you, you guys already know it. And they are described by a great number of Greek and Roman authors, ones like Suetonius and Tacitus. They told all that story. So he said, I don't have to tell you that. You know it already. Yet, for the sake of the connection of matters, and that my history may not be incoherent, I have just touched upon everything briefly. So he says, I'm writing about the Jews, the nation of the Jews, the wars of the Jews. I'm not going to tell you about the wars that the Romans had against themselves, but it does affect my history of the Jews. So I'm going to tell you this stuff. So that's where he's at right now. Wherefore Vespasian put off at first his expedition against Jerusalem, and stood waiting whether the empire would be transferred after the death, or whether the empire would be transferred after the death of Nero. In other words, what's going to happen to the transfer of power. So instead of coming straight down and attacking Jerusalem, he waited there in Caesarea for a while. I gotta wait and see what's happening over there in Rome. So that's what he did. Put off the expedition against Jerusalem. Moreover, when he heard that Galba was made emperor, he attempted nothing till he also should send him some directions about the war. Okay, Galba's the emperor. He needs to tell me what he wants me to do. However, he sent his son Titus to him to salute him and to receive his commands about the Jews. So Vespasian's in Caesarea. He sends his son Titus, another general that had been helping conquer Israel, sends him back to Rome, gets some directions from Galba. And upon the very same errand did King Agrippa sail along with Titus to Galba. So Agrippa, we know him from the book of Acts. He sailed along with Titus to Galba. But as they were sailing in their long ships by the coasts of Achaia, that's Greece, where there it was winter time. Winter time is not a time to be sailing in the Mediterranean. And so they were taking this trip out of dire necessity to get instructions from Galba and to see how things were going in Rome. So for it was wintertime, they had heard that Galba was slain. So before they even got there, Galba had been killed. Before they could get to him, after he had reigned 7 months and as many days, after whom Otho took the government and undertook the management of public affairs. So Agrippa resolved to go on to Rome without any terror on account of the change in the government. But Titus, by a divine impulse, sailed back from Greece to Syria. So Titus, I think he saw the writing on the wall. Galba didn't if Galba didn't make it, we got a problem in Rome. I need to go back and get my dad, send him back to fix this. So anyway, he sailed back from Greece to Syria while Agrippa headed on further on to Rome. And Titus came in great haste to Caesarea to his father. And now they were both in suspense about the public affairs, the Roman Empire being then in fluctuating condition, and did not go on with their expedition against the Jews, but thought that to make any attack upon the foreigners was now unseasonable, wasn't a good time, on account of the solicitude they were in for their own country. In other words, Titus and Vespasian saying, we got real problems in our own country that need to get fixed before we worry about conquering some other country. So then, now sedition and civil war prevailed, not only over Judea, but in Italy also. So now we got a revolt going on in Judea that they were sent over there to suppress this revolt. Now they got revolts going on in Rome, and they don't know who's going to take care of it. So they're, okay, let's hold off on Israel for a while. And it just so happened that it was during this time that the Christians had a chance to get out of there. And so that a lot of them left during this time. Okay, so not only over Judea, but Italy also, for now Galba was slain in the midst of the Roman marketplace. Then was Otho made emperor and fought against Vitellius. So these two were fighting for the emperorship, who set up for emperor also, for the legions in Germany had chosen him. So the ones in Spain, no, I don't know who chose the Otho. It was Galba that was his legions had sent him from Spain to be the emperor. But now they're ones that the guy was fighting in Germany. His soldiers sent him up to try for the emperorship. But when he gave battle to Valens and Caecina, who were Vitellius's generals at Betracium in Gaul, Otho gained the advantage on the first day. But on the second day, Vitellius's soldiers had victory, and after much slaughter, Otho slew himself. Then when he had heard of this defeat at Brixia, and after he had managed the public affairs for 3 months and 2 days, Otho's army also came over to Vitellius's generals, and he came himself down to Rome with his army. But in the meantime, Vespasian removed from Caesarea, so he left Caesarea, and on the 5th day of the month of the Jewish month of Sivan, and marched against those places of Judea which were not yet overthrown. So he's not going for Jerusalem yet, but just some of the places in Judea that they hadn't taken yet. So he went up to the mountainous country, and he took those 2 toparchies that were called Gophnitic. These are names that I'm not familiar with. Acrabatine toparchies, after which he took Bethel and Ephraim, names which we know, and 2 small cities. And when he had put garrisons into them, he rode as far as Jerusalem, in which march he took many prisoners and many captives. But Cyrillus, one of his commanders, took a body of horsemen and footmen and laid waste that part of Idumea, which was called Upper Idumea, and attacked Capithera, which pretended to be a small city, and he took it at the first onset and burned it down. So he's conquering Judea and also Idumea, which is on the other side of the Dead Sea from Israel. So they're conquering the south part now, and they're saving Jerusalem for last. Jerusalem was the crown jewel. And so he also attacked Capthobria and laid siege to it for it had been a very strong wall. And when he expected to spend a long time in that siege, those that were with operated their gates on a sudden and came out to beg pardon and surrendered themselves up to him. When Cyrillus had conquered them, he went to Hebron, another very ancient city. I've told you already that this city is situated in a mountainous country not far from Jerusalem. Hebron is down south of Jerusalem, so he's still in the south country. He went. Hebron goes all the way back to Abraham time. So anyway, he came to that city, and when he had broken into the city by force, what multitude and young men were left therein, he slew and burnt down the city, so that as now all the places were taken except Herodium. Herodium was a hill, what we call a tell. It was a mound that was built up flat on top, and Herod had built this magnificent palace on top of the Herodium, and that's where Herod the Great had made his own headquarters, like Camp David for some, I can't remember which president had Camp David, but it was Eisenhower. Okay, so anyway, you get the idea that so he didn't take that because that was already a Roman holding, and Masada and Machaerus. Masada, we'll talk about. We've already have talked about Masada a little bit. It was almost. It was the very last place that was conquered in Israel. May talk some more about that at some point. But anyway, he's leaving. He's not attacking them, which were in the possession of the robbers. The Romans had built the fortress at Masada, but some of the rebels had gone down there and conquered it. And so the rebels had it. And then the last thing that happened, like 79 AD-ish, the Romans finally broke in and they built a ramp, huge ramp up to the city. And when they broke in, everybody had killed themselves that were in there because they didn't want to be conquered. Anyway, they're leaving them alone for now. So Jerusalem was what the Romans at present aimed at. Okay, so now we're going to go to another place in Josephus. In the meantime, Antonius Primus took the third of the legions that were in Mysia, for he was president of that province. That's up north in Asia Minor. He took a third of the legions that were in Mysia, for he was president of that province, and made haste in order to fight Vitellius. So a bunch of them that were in another part had to go to Rome to try to fight. And he made haste in order to fight Vitellius, whereupon Vitellius sent away Caecina with a great army, having mighty confidence in him because of his having beaten Otho. This Caecina marched out of Rome in great haste and found Antonius about Cremona in Gaul. This is Gaul. I think I said it was Spain. Gaul is Germany. So they're fighting against each other now. These Roman armies are going to be fighting each other in Gaul, which city is in the borders of Italy, right on the border of Germany. But when they saw there that the enemy were numerous and in good order, he dared not fight them. And as he thought a retreat dangerous, so he began to think of betraying his army to Antonius. So he's thinking, I can't turn around and get out of here, and I can't beat him. So if you can't beat him, join him. So that's what he's doing here. This is some of the confusion that was going on while everybody was in a miserable state for this time. But when he saw that there was, so he began to think of betraying his army to Antonius. Accordingly, he assembled the centurions and tribunes that were under his command and persuaded them to go over to Antonius, and this by diminishing the reputation of Vitellius And by exaggerating the power of Vespasian, he also told them that with one, there was no more than the bare minimum, the bare name of dominion, but with the other, did I do the right? Yeah. But with the other was the power of it, and that it was better for them to prevent necessity and gain favor, and while they were likely to be overcome in battle, to avoid the danger beforehand and go over to Antonius willingly, that Vespasian was able of himself to subdue what had not yet uh, submitted without their assistance, while Vitellius could not preserve what he had already with it. The bottom line is, we'd be better off to join the other guys because Vespasian's going to take care of his part, and there's a better likelihood of having victory if we go over to the other side. Okay, now we're going to go to the next paragraph. Cinna said this, and much more to the same purpose, and persuaded them to comply with him. And both he and his army deserted. But still, the very same night, the soldiers repented of what they had done. Fear seized them, lest perhaps Vitellius, who sent them, should get the better. And drawing their swords, they assaulted Cinna in order to kill him. And the thing had been done by them if the tribunes had not fallen upon their knees and besought them not to do it. So the soldiers did not kill him, but put him in bonds, the traitor, and were about to. When Antonius Primus heard this, he raised up his men immediately and made them put on their armor and led them against those that had revolted. Thereupon they put themselves in order of battle and made a resistance for a while, but were soon beaten and fled to Cremona. Then did Primus take his horsemen and cut off their entrance to that city, and encompassed and destroyed the great multitude of them before the city fell into and fell into the city together with the rest, and gave leave to his soldiers to plunder it. And here it was that many strangers who were merchants, as well as many of the people of the country, perished, and among them Vitellius's whole army, being 30,200, while Antonius lost no more of those that came with him from Mysia than 4,500. Then he loosed Cinna and sent him to Vespasian to tell him the good news. So he came and was received by him and covered the scandal of his treachery by unexpected honors that he received from Vespasian. So here he was trying to go against Vespasian, but it didn't work, and then he ended up getting honors because he had won this victory and said, "Okay, I did it for you, Vespasian." So anyway, intrigue and junk stuff happening. You can imagine with all this fighting amongst the generals and the tribunes and the Romans fighting, the soldiers fighting against themselves. What do you think is happening amongst the common folks? They're they're just messed up, because where do the Roman soldiers get food and the supplies? They get it from the common folks. And so wherever these Roman armies are going, they're just taking over people's homes or taking their stuff. And so you can imagine, it's not hard to understand why the people were crying out and cursing God because of what was going on. And when Josephus says cursing God with the Romans, it would be, the Roman gods, the deities or whatever you want to call them. Anyway, they're cursing deity because of what was going on. So you see this stuff happening. All right, let's continue. Now, upon the news that Antonius was approaching, Sabinius took courage at Rome. And you don't have to know all these and be able to put them all together. I just want you to get a general feeling for what was going on. um, Sabinius took courage at Rome and assembled those cohorts of soldiers that kept watch by night, and in the nighttime seized upon the capital. And as the day came on, many of them, men of character, came over to him with Domitian, his brother's son, whose encouragement was of very great weight for the compassing, uh, for the compassing government. And we have the first mention of Domitian. If you remember, Domitian was the emperor uh, later on, closer to in the 90s AD, and it was under him that a lot the late date people claim that Domitian was the one that persecuted the Christians, and that's when the Book of Revelation was written in 96 AD. So now he's just a young man, but he's gaining reputation here. So he's a young soldier, maybe even a general by this time. But um, anyway, we're just introduced to him. So now Vitellius was not much concerned at this Primus, but was very angry with those who had revolted with Sabinius, and thirsting out of his own natural barbarity after noble blood. He sent out that part of the army which came along with him to fight against the capital, and many bold actions were done on this side and on the side of those that held the temple. But at last, the soldiers came from Germany, being too numerous for the others, got the hill into their possession, where Domitian, with many other of the principal Romans, providently escaped, while the rest of the multitude were entirely cut to pieces. Sabinius himself was brought to Vitellius and then slain. The soldiers also plundered the temple of its ornaments. This is one of the temples in Rome. We're not talking about the temple in Israel. The soldiers set it on fire, but now within a day's time came Antonius with his army and were met by Vitellius and his army. And having had a battle in 3 several places, the last were all destroyed. Then did Vitellius come out of the palace in his cups. And what does that mean? Somebody's in their cups. Yeah, he's drunk. He comes out of the temple drunk, and I gotta find my place here. And satiated with an extravagant and luxurious meal, in the last extremity, and being drawn along through the multitude, and abused with all sorts of torments, had his head cut off in the middle of Rome, having retained the government 8 months and 5 days. And had he lived much longer, I cannot but think the empire would not have been sufficient for his lust. Of the others that were slain were numbered above 50,000. 50,000 people killed. Of the others, this battle was fought on the 3rd day of the month, the Apelles, Caslu, Hebrew calendar. And on the next day, Mucianus came into the city with his army and ordered Antonius and his men to leave off killing, for they were still searching the houses, and killed many of Vitellius' soldiers and many of the populace, as supposing them to be of his party. In other words, they're just killing everybody, the people too, thinking that they were on Vitellius' side, and preventing by their rage any accurate distinction between them and others. He then produced Domitian and recommended him to the multitude until his father should come himself. So the people, being now freed from their fears, made acclamations for joy for Vespasian, for their emperor had kept festival days for his confirmation and for the destruction of Vitellius. This brought an end to the Roman Civil War. When I left out the part where Vespasian leaves Israel and goes over to start this fighting. this was we started this particular reading in the middle of the fighting with Vespasian already over there trying to settle things down. So that's the kind of stuff that was going on between the death of Nero and uh, the time the destruction of Jerusalem, or when Vespasian sent Titus back to do the siege of Jerusalem. That's why that description says the people were, really upset and cursing God and everything. So that's what we're talking about with the fifth of the bowls of wrath. So, and that parallels, if you go back and read in the ninth chapter, it parallels that. So the fifth the fifth of the bowls is the beast throne. Now we're already past time. Just by way of looking ahead to next week, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. So we're gonna talk about that next week, and I guess that's where I'll leave it for now. Okay. Yeah, to be honest, I don't. Yeah, yeah. I'm guessing that there were a lot of mass graves, just like there was in World War II. Um, they certainly could not have buried them individually and had a 21 gun salute and all that kind of stuff for them. Yeah, it had to have been awful. And that's probably another one of the reasons the people were suffering so bad, because soldiers are not going to clean up the mess. They just go in and make the mess. Somebody else has to come in and clean it up. So anyway, that's where I'll leave it. We didn't really get very far actually in the book of Revelation, but it's so important to understand what what was going on, that all of these images in the book of Revelation are talking about. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we see here, you you can look at and see it with. Soon I've been watching these shows on the Vikings and also the how England came to be. The kings fighting each other and all this kind of stuff. Same stuff happening over and over again, and we got the same stuff going on even now. I said we just read 50,000 people who died. I don't know how many people have died just in Gaza or in the Palestinian uh, that strip now. Most of they're trying to kill the soldiers, but guess what? What percentage of them are actual civilians? Same thing exactly happening. Anyway, uh, that's where we'll leave it, and we'll be back together again in about 10 minutes, I guess. hello to 2024. Okay, so uh, it's been quite a year, I guess, for many of us. I hadn't planned this, but I was reminded of a story that I heard one time. Two guys were talking about having a nice brand new car that God gave them, and how do I want to return it to God when I go to heaven? And the one guy says, "Man, I am going to keep that thing polished up and shiny, low miles. I'm going to drive it up there and give it back to him just like he gave it to me." And the other guy is saying, when I get up there, I want to go in sliding to a stop and the wheels fall off, and saying, "I just want to live my life to the fullest and wear myself out for the cause of Christ." And it's kind of what this lesson is about, although there's quite a bit to go through before. Uh, Most of you probably have heard this lesson before, but someone that's special to me asked me to preach it again. It's a good lesson to start the year with. It's not super happy at first, but it has a good message. The scripture reading I wanted us to read was, "Come now, you who say tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. But what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that." Really, it all depends on God. And so I want to talk about a shocking story, one that you've heard before, but this lesson I call a New York Minute. Starts out in New York City. Myself and a friend were visiting New York City while Sue and my friend's wife were touring in Long Island, looking around. We went to New York City and did some stuff there, riding on a hop-on, hop-off bus. But after we got off the bus, it was about noontime, and we decided we needed to go get something to eat. And we were right near the bus had dropped it off at Union Station, and so we were right near the north end of Times Square, one of the most famous places in the world, Times Square. It's where on New Year's Day the ball goes up and everybody cheers, and there's 100,000 people in Times Square, and just a great celebration of a new year. We were right there on Broadway in New York City, Times Square. Can't get any more New York than that. And so we went looking for something to eat, and I wanted to get something in particular, and that was New York style pizza. And we went to this place, Joe's Pizza, right exactly on Broadway Avenue, famous Broadway. And when you go to Joe's Pizza, as you can see, you get in the line and you go in, and as you approach, this is what you see. You see guys making pizzas, and you can see the size of the slices that you buy when you get a pizza. And in one little New York minute, you can have yourself a couple of slices of some of the best pizza you'll ever eat. If you like New York style with a thin crust, that is so good. And when I got mine, this is what my face looked like. And I was chowing down. I actually got that same order. That wasn't really mine that this picture is of, but that's exactly what I got. And as I sat down to eat, I was right where that arrow is, where that person is sitting. It's a little bit inside from the window on the outside, but I had a direct view to this doorway where the person with the red hat is standing about I had a direct view, and we ate our pizza, and I got two pieces of that pizza, and my friend, being a kind of a wimpy guy, he only got one, and so he was done before me, and he had some rearranging to do in a shopping bag that he had. So he was over just behind this door, just a little bit inside, and I was finishing my pizza, and all of a sudden, uh, just as we were kind of getting ready to leave, I was just finishing up my pizza. I heard a commotion outside. I couldn't tell what it was, but I just heard kind of some shouts. Then I saw a dark shadow fly by coming that way in front of me. And then I heard a thud. And as soon as that thud happened, then I saw a, a woman unconscious falling backwards onto the floor. And in one little New York minute, Maria Ambrosio was lying there and would never wake up. She had been killed by a man, and I'll finish the story. Um, a block up the road, this man had smashed a 29-year-old woman in the face, grabbed her cell phone, and was running away. And as he ran by this restaurant, this woman and a friend were walking out the door. They were coming out the door of the restaurant, and he plowed into Maria, knocked her against the door, which is the thud that I heard. And then as soon as I looked over after hearing that thud, then I saw her fall backwards. And I had just witnessed a murder. Uh, we're gonna see more about this as we go through. The very same day and the next day, there were these headlines in the New York papers, in the New York Times, as you will see. And this woman, she was just she was actually had no brain function whatsoever, and they kept her alive till the next day, and the family had a time to gather around, and then they took off the life support, and she actually died then. But I'm just going to read what this report says. The New Jersey cancer nurse. She's from New Jersey, just across the water from New York. She was a cancer nurse. She'd been working very, very well respected. She's 56 years old. Anyway, she was knocked down by this homeless mugger in Times Square, and she died Saturday evening after clinging to life for a day and a half. Actually, it was only, well, I guess it was a day and a couple hours. But anyway, um, Ambrosio, who said she was, or who said was 58. I think I just said 56, but anyway, she was 58. She was walking through Times Square around 1:30 Friday with her friends after accompanying a pal to the Philippine consulate in Midtown and having lunch before heading home, friends and family said. So all they were doing is just trying to have some lunch after doing some sightseeing, walk out the door, bang, it's all over. It was the same time that cops say Jermaine Foster allegedly went on a crime spree, grabbing a cell phone from a 29-year-old woman's hands at West 41st Street in Broadway, and then slamming into Ambrosio as he fled. She was rushed to Bellevue Hospital with head trauma. And then one more news report from the New York Times. Maria Ambrosio, 58, who worked through the pandemic in New Jersey hospital, was knocked down by a man who was fleeing after snatching a cell phone, the police said. In one New York minute, Maria Ambrosio lost her life. I'll read a passage of scripture. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. It's part of our scripture reading for this morning. Life is short. It comes and it goes more briefly than we all like to know. She was the victim. Then there is the perpetrator of this thing that happened, 26-year-old Jermaine Foster. Foster, 26, who is homeless, was charged early Saturday morning with robbery and assault in connection with the incidents, police say. That was the next day. That was on Saturday, charged with a robbery and assault. But after about 8 p.m. that evening, it was now murder in the second degree. His life changed forever in a New York minute. One moment, he's, I guess, what you would call a regular guy, kind of. Maybe a mugger, I guess you'd say, but the next moment, he's a murderer. Going to be spending time in prison because of that. Here's another article from the CBS News Network. This Kieran Dillon reports Orette Montague, who was his, it says he remains in shock, his stepson. So he was the stepfather of this person. And he says his stepson, Jermaine Foster, is charged with murder in the connection with the death of 58-year-old Maria Ambrosio. He says about his stepson, he's never gotten into trouble of this sort. He said, I feel so bad for them, the people of the victim. I know it's so heartbreaking. So it didn't just change his stepson's life, it changed his as well. This article continues. Ambrosio, a longtime oncology nurse at Bayonne Medical Center, was in Times Square Friday afternoon with friends when police allege Foster plowed into her outside the pizzeria while running away after stealing another woman's phone moments before. Ambrosio was pushed. She fell and cracked her skull and later died. Sources say Foster took off but was arrested minutes later, adding he was also involved in a home invasion robbery shortly before at a woman's apartment nearby, as well as a groping incident in Midtown last month. So maybe he wasn't quite as a regular guy. But anyway, this stepfather says, stealing a phone? That's impossible. He has this phone. He's not that type of guy, Montague said. He was a religious man. Okay, well, that may be his story. The family is sure he must have been off his medication to do something like this. Anytime he's not on his medication, he doesn't think right, Montague said. When his dad died from COVID-19, he was left alone. Foster's family says he was not a violent person and had no prior record beyond this incident and what happened last month. They want more resources to help those with mental illness. As for Ambrosio, her family says knowing Foster suffers from mental illness or is homeless is of little consolation. He's now a murderer. In a New York minute, a person lost her life and a person became a murderer. He didn't intend for that to happen. The little choices that we make can have repercussions that we cannot even imagine. Maybe it's not murder. Maybe it's something different. But maybe just a little choice. All he did was decide, for some reason, maybe he's off his meds, whatever. He decided, I want that phone. And he grabs it, runs down the street, bounces off a person, kills them. Just because he wanted a cell phone. Little choice. Great repercussions for not only him, but for other people. Well, what would happen if it had been just one New York minute later? That could have been me. Ron and I were getting ready to walk out that door. It could have been me that guy plowed into. That could have gone different ways. I could have been blindsided just like Maria was, and I would not be here talking to you guys. Or it could have gone a different way. I'm a bigger person than Maria by a long shot. Maybe he would have just bounced off me and gone on his way, not be a murderer. Nobody died. Jermaine Foster would go on his merry way. Either way, one New York minute later, Maria Ambrosio would still be alive. If it had just been 1 minute later, what a difference a New York minute makes. Things can happen so quick. I want to say a quick example from recent times. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a tornado in Tennessee. You may have read this. Little baby, forget how old, 6, 7 months old baby, in her crib, whatever you want to call that, when the tornado struck the trailer. Her stepfather was holding on to her for dear life, and the tornado sucked both her and him out through the crushed trailer, while the mother and two other children were hiding in a place, and they were spared. The father and this little baby sucked out and sucked up somewhere. The crib ended up here, and I think it was the next day they found this crib, and this little baby was in there alive. In a New York minute, she could have been sucked up out and destroyed, but through whatever you want to call it, a miracle or whatever, she was spared. She was up 20 feet in a tree, hanging by a branch, and had been smashed against her, obviously, from the looks of this thing, but she was still alive. And this is a picture of her after the accident. She has a couple little nicks. Miraculous. One New York minute. Now I want to talk a little bit about one of our brothers in his past year. He was gone in a New York minute. None of us expected this to happen. Merle Berggren, who lived September 49th, 1939 to Thanksgiving Day of this year, he passed from this life and just went into the hospital to get a heart catheterization, something that's fairly routine these days. I don't know what happened, but Merle passed away during either right after that or during it, and he was gone. And this picture is really a good picture of him as far as telling us the kind of character he was. He loved to fish and he lived life. But just in a New York minute, his life faded away. I want to read a chapter a passage from Ecclesiastes 5. From the wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, here's what I've seen. He starts off the book of Ecclesiastes saying, I was trying to find out what's the answer to life, essentially. And he says, here's what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his reward. For as for every man who God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not often dwell on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. This is what Merle lived. He kept busy. He was always doing stuff for the church and fishing and that kind of thing. He lived his life to the fullest. He was one of those that gets in the car, and when he pulls up to heaven, skids to a stop and the wheels fall off, because he lived his life. That's the encouragement that we all ought to take from his life, is to live life while you can. Life is short. Like James says, it's just a vapor. here today and gone for a while, but also life can change so quickly, just in the twinkling of an eye. We all need to be prepared for whatever happens. Whatever happens, uh, we need to be ready for it. This life, for Christians, when this life ends, it's just the beginning, really. This life is a sojourn. We don't belong here. We belong elsewhere. As Christians, we belong in heaven with God, and we're just pilgrims here on this earth. And we're meant to live life like Solomon said. Just use whatever God has given you and given you the ability to use it and enjoy it. He also says in Ecclesiastes, which I didn't put in here, that we're going to have to answer for what we do as we live our life. There's different ways to live life, but what I'm talking about is living it in the righteous and a holy way, but still enjoying. God gave us such a wonderful earth to enjoy. We need to do that. We need to keep in mind every moment of every day, because we do not know when that time is going to end for us. I want to talk about one more moment that's mentioned in the Bible, and it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting in verse 51. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. That's for Christians. Oh, death, where's your sting? You can't hurt me. I'm going to a place to live forever. Oh, Hades, realm of the dead, where's your victory? You don't have victory over a Christian, because there's something after this physical body dies. The sting of death is sin. That's what puts the sting in death, is sin, because then you die eternally if you die in your sin. The strength of sin is the law, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Because of what Jesus did, we can have victory over sin and death, live eternally in heaven. In a New York minute, we'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye when Jesus comes at last. One more passage. This also from Ecclesiastes. I returned and saw under the sun. He likes that term, under the sun. It just means life here on earth. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, no favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. For man also does not know his time. Like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of men are snarled in a bad time when it falls suddenly upon them. We do not know when the end is come for us. And we're all going to perish physically at some point. We don't know when it is. We need to be ready. And the way we can be ready is because this verse, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. We don't have to perish eternally because God gave his Son for us. But you have to, last 2 weeks we've talked about what must I do to inherit eternal life. You have to take those steps, put that puzzle together, put all the pieces together in order to gain access to the Son. Romans 6 says that we are united with Christ in the likeness of his death when we're buried with him in baptism and then raised up out of the water to newness of life, just like Jesus was raised out of the grave to newness of life, to never die again. He gained his spiritual body back again and is in heaven waiting for us to appear. So as we enter a new year, let us all remember that life can end or change in a New York minute. I just want to leave you with that thought. We need to be prepared at all times, and we need to live our lives. Too many times we put life on hold and try to accumulate stuff or whatever. I want to be able to enjoy life when I'm 80 years old or whatever. You don't know if you're going to make it to 80 or not. You need to live life while you can. And that's the beauty of being a Christian, is that God will take care of you. God will take care of us, and we can live our lives while we are here, just like Solomon said, this is what I've seen. Live your life. And now we're going to sing this song, Because He Lives. Jesus lives again. And because He lives, we all can face tomorrow. However many tomorrows we have, because Jesus lives, we can face tomorrow, because we know that that's not the end for us. If our physical end comes, we're still headed on to the next part of our journey, and that is eternity with Him. So as we sing this song, think about the things that we've talked about this morning. If you need to be obedient to the gospel, just come on, let it be known, and we can take care of that. If you need to repent, get your life straight before God before you walk out this door, you can do that too by praying and asking God for forgiveness if you're already a Christian. And so I just encourage you to take this opportunity, if the invitation applies to you, to come while we stand and sing Because He Lives.